Hi, thank you for joining me for another episode of A White Woman in Distress. This podcast is dedicated to raising awareness for missing children, teens, and adults who have vanished under heartbreaking circumstances. My mission is simple: to keep their stories alive and to help bring them back to their families. In a world where media coverage isn't always equal, it's vital to recognize that many cases go overlooked. Marginalized groups, including Indigenous people, people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, runaway teens, and homeless individuals often face systematic barriers, leading to underinvestigations and inadequate attention. These groups deserve to have their stories heard just as loudly, whether it's just jurisdictional complexities affecting Indigenous women and girls, or the media bias towards missing people of color, or the stigmas of runaway teens, or those living on the streets. These cases remind us that real change is needed and necessary. Grassroots efforts, community involvement, and legislative advocacy are essential in turning the tide to better these responses. You don't have to be in the front lines to make a difference. Even small actions, like sharing information or providing anonymous tips, can play a crucial role in bringing a loved one home. Every family deserves answers, and every missing person deserves to be found. I want to take you guys back for a minute. The whole reason I started doing this podcast was because when you used to walk into Walmart, does anybody else remember that wall that was like when you walk in, it was on the left? At least in my Walmart, it was on the left when you walked in, and it was just a whole wall of missing people. And have you seen me? And we don't have that anymore. They don't post that anymore. And I feel like because they aren't doing that, we're not realizing how many people are actually missing, especially in our area, in our state. I just feel like we've kind of taken a step back in spreading information. I don't know if that was specifically a Walmart thing or not, but there was always a way to see missing people. So I'm trying to help bring that back, and I'm trying to get the word out there and be a good person. And I really want everybody out there to be a good person too. With that being said, before we dive into today's story, please be aware that this content may include themes of violence, sexual assault, or other distressing topics. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we'll be covering the heartbreaking case of Kathleen Shea, a 6-year-old girl who vanished on her way to school in Tyrone, Pennsylvania on March 18, 1965. Despite massive search efforts and investigations over the years, Kathleen's fate remains a mystery. So as always, I'm going to go into the backstory of who they were, what they were like as a person, and then we'll go into the investigation and then afterthoughts. Kathleen Shea, affectionately known as Kathy, was born on February 2nd, 1959, in Tyrone, Pennsylvania. She was the oldest of 3 children in a close-knit family. Kathy was a quiet, friendly, and well-liked child with a bright future ahead of her. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a fun, easygoing nature, like many other children her age. Kathy enjoyed walking to school and spending time with her family. At the time of her disappearance, Kathy had just returned to school after being out for several weeks. She had her tonsils removed, and during her recovery, she also caught the chickenpox, which is terrifying to me because you're already sick because you have your tonsils out, and then you all of a sudden get chickenpox, and it's like, no. I couldn't imagine what the parents went through. Her return to school was a moment of excitement for Kathy. She was so eager to see her friends again, and she was even looking forward to a sleepover with her cousin that Friday, March the 19th. Sadly, she never got a chance to attend that sleepover. Let's walk through the timeline of Kathy's disappearance, which remains one of Tyrone's most haunting cold cases. March 18th, 1965, 12 p.m. After attending her morning kindergarten classes at Adams Elementary School, Kathy returned home for lunch, as was her usual routine. Her family home was located on 14th Street in Tyrone, only about 4 blocks from the school. March 18th, 1965, at 12:10 p.m., after lunch, Kathy's father, James Shea, offered to drive her back to school for her afternoon classes, but Kathy, being independent, chose to walk the short distance. She left the house wearing a brown hat with tie-down ear flaps, a beige coat with a fur collar, a red knitted sweater, a brown jumper, red tights, red leather gloves, earmuffs, and yellow boots with black soles. She was in good spirits, excited to return to school after being out sick. March 18th, around 12:15 to 12:30 p.m. Kathy was last seen walking between 15th and 16th Streets, just a block and a half from her school. A crossing guard, an older student who was acting as a patrol boy, helped her cross the street. Afterwards, she briefly stopped to chat with a neighbor, who later reported that Kathy seemed happy and cheerful. At 4:45 p.m. that same day, Kathy's mother, Mary Alice Shea, became concerned when Kathy didn't return home from school at her usual time, which any parent would be. First, she assumed Kathy might have stayed after school to catch up on her work due to her recent absence. But when she called the school, Kathy's teacher, Judy Norris, told her that Kathy hadn't attended the afternoon class. The school had not notified the family, assuming that Kathy was still recovering from illness and that basically that the first half of the day had just really worn her out because she had been out sick. So they didn't really notify the family. At 5 p.m. later that day, realizing that something was terribly wrong, Mary Alice contacted local police. Soon after, the search for Kathy began with neighbors, friends, and local authorities joining in the effort. Search dogs were brought in, and they were able to trace Kathy's scent to Garfield Street, which was just 1 block from her school before the trail went completely cold. In the days following her disappearance, the search for Kathy became one of the largest in Tyrone's history. Nearly 3,000 volunteers, including high school students who were released from class, combed the town and its surrounding areas. People searched garages, alleys, abandoned buildings, woods, and parks, including Reservoir Park. Fire companies organized search parties, and local law enforcement worked tirelessly to uncover any clues. But despite these efforts, no trace of Kathy was ever found. No discarded lunchbox, no school supplies, and no other personal belongings were ever recovered, leaving investigators with very little to go on. The lack of physical evidence made it difficult to form any concrete theories about what happened to her. The case actually drew the attention of the FBI, who assisted local and state authorities in the investigation. Unfortunately, no solid leads ever emerged. The disappearance of a young girl from such a small, safe community shook the town of Tyrone to its core. Parents became afraid to let their children play outside or walk to school alone, which it's a different time now, but back then it was really normal for 6-year-olds to go to kindergarten and walk themselves if they were close enough. Because today it's like, oh no, I would never. I would have to watch my child go from our house to the school all the way. There is no, okay, bye, have a great day, and let them walk. But back then it was a totally different time. People locked their doors and kept an closer eye on their children, something that had been previously unnecessary in this tight-knit town. Even decades later, the people of Tyrone still remember Kathy and the tragic event that took her away. Over the years, several theories have emerged about what may have happened to Kathy. Authorities and family members believe Kathy was likely abducted by a stranger, but the lack of physical evidence has made it difficult to solve the case. Here are some of the main theories and leads in her case. So, most investigators believed that Kathy was abducted by someone she did not know. In the months leading up to her disappearance, there were reports of a suspicious man in the neighborhood, which an 11-year-old boy who acted as the crossing guard told police that a few months before Kathy vanished, an older man had approached him and asked him to point out Kathy. This man was never identified, and his involvement in this case remains speculative. Now, on the day that Kathy disappeared, a woman walking her daughter to school reported seeing a dark-colored car driving slowly through the neighborhood. This car was seen by others as well, but nobody could provide enough details for the authorities to even track it down to look into it. Some believe that this car may have been involved in Kathy's abduction. So there's also the bloodhounds that traced Kathy's scent to Garfield Street, just a block from her school, but after that, the trail went cold. It was as if she had been lifted into the air, kind of, because the trail stopped. This could indicate that Kathy was taken from this location, possibly by a vehicle, which would explain why her scent just abruptly stopped. The Callie theory, which was in 1979, the remains of a small girl were found in New York. For a time, authorities thought the remains might belong to Kathy, as several markers suggested a possible match. However, further analysis ruled this out. And in 2015, the remains were identified as belonging to Tammy Jo Alexander, a girl from Florida. Despite this, the incident highlighted how Kathy's case was still being actively considered even years later. Kathy's disappearance left a permanent mark on the Shea family. Her parents, James and Mary Alice, lived the rest of their lives without ever knowing what had happened to their oldest daughter. Kathy's two younger brothers, one of whom still lives in Pennsylvania and the other in Ohio, have continued to hope for answers. Her younger sister, who was born after Kathy disappeared, now lives in Florida. Kathy's mother passed away in 1997 and her father died in 2006, without ever knowing or finding out what happened to their daughter. However, they never gave up hope, and the town of Tyrone has not forgotten about Kathy. A memorial plaque was actually placed at Adams Elementary School in 2015 to mark the 50th anniversary of her abduction. This plaque serves as a reminder to the community to remain vigilant and keep Kathy's memory alive. Though decades have passed since Kathy's disappearance, her case does remain open. Investigators with the Pennsylvania State Police Cold Case Unit continue to work on this case, following up on any new information that arises. As recently as 2016, the case files spanned over 1,000 pages, filled with witness statements, search logs, and investigative reports. Trooper Donna Martini, who was assigned the case in 2016, said that Kathy's name continues to come up in conversation around Tyrone, demonstrating how deeply her disappearance impacted this small town. Modern technology, such as DNA analysis, has been used to rule out certain unidentified remains, but so far, no definitive evidence has surfaced to close the case. Kathleen Shea's disappearance is a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of children and the long-lasting pain of not knowing what happened to a loved one. Her family, friends, and community of Tyrone have held on to hope for over 5 decades, but the answers they seek have remained elusive. If you have any information to help solve this mystery, or you know what happened to Kathy, or you have any kind of tip, no matter how small, please contact the Pennsylvania State Police at 814-696-6100 and ask for Trooper Dana Martini. Callers can remain anonymous. Together, we can help bring attention to long-forgotten cases and offer hope to the families still waiting for answers. Please stay safe out there and stay vigilant. And remember, if you see something, say something and do something.